When cupboards ran bare and money was worth less than a loaf of bread, families didn't stop cooking. They got creative. They stretched one onion into a feast, made soup from bones, and turned scraps into supper. Once more, we stepped back into those kitchens, where survival was measured not in dollars, but in ingenuity. These are the 25 meals our great-grandparents cooked when there was nothing left. Reminders that even in hunger, creativity never ran out. We'll begin where the cupboards were already bare, and the magic began, in kitchens that turned scraps into miracles. Water gravy. When the milk was gone and the drippings jar scraped dry, there was still one last miracle left in the skillet. It began with a pan still warm from breakfast, a few browned crumbs of flour and fat clinging stubbornly to the surface. Into that memory of grease went a splash of plain water, and a handful of flour stirred slow, round, and steady. The mixture sizzled and hissed, turning from clear to cloudy, from watery to velvet, thickened by nothing but motion and hope. The smell rose like smoke from a chimney, faint, savory, and humble. Salt and pepper were added by feel, not measure, and sometimes a drop of coffee for color. Poured over yesterday's biscuits or the crusts of day-old bread, it became dinner. Children learned early that flavor wasn't an ingredient. It was effort, stirred until it became something worth serving. Water gravy was proof that the poorest table could still smell like home. It didn't taste of what was lost. It tasted of what was left. Vinegar pie. They called it desperation pie, though it never tasted desperate. In farmhouses across the South, women mixed water, flour, a spoon of sugar, and a splash of vinegar, the secret that gave it bite. Butter was gone, lemons too, but vinegar mimicked the tang, tricking the tongue into thinking luxury had returned. The filling boiled in a tin pan until it thickened and shone like amber glass. When baked inside a simple crust, it set firm and custard-like, tart enough to wake a tired spirit. The smell filled the house, sweet, sour, comforting. Some topped it with a dusting of flour instead of cream. Others pretended it was lemon and never corrected the children. At the table, no one mentioned what it wasn't. They just said, "That'll do." For a few minutes, supper felt like Sunday again. Tomato macaroni. It began with army rations and ended as one of the Depression's cleverest meals. Macaroni was cheap and filling, and canned tomatoes lasted through the worst of winters. Together, they became a kind of red salvation. Boiled pasta met simmering tomatoes in a single battered pot, seasoned with salt and onion if luck allowed. When oil or butter ran out, a spoon of lard took its place. Some added corn or beans. Others crumbled stale bread on top to make it seem grander. The sauce bubbled slowly, staining the kitchen walls with tiny red freckles. Its smell, acid, sweet, and warm, was the scent of survival. A pot could feed 6, maybe 8, and still leave enough for breakfast. It was simple, yes, but it reminded families that flavor didn't depend on wealth, just on heat and heart. Mock chicken. Meat was rare, so cooks learned to fake it. Made from crushed saltine crackers, eggs, onion, and a touch of broth or milk. It came together in a bowl that smelled faintly of hope. The mixture was shaped into patties, dusted in flour, and fried until golden brown. As it sizzled, the aroma turned strangely convincing, savory, nutty, almost meaty. The sound of the crust crackling in the pan brought the illusion to life. Served hot with gravy or over bread, it fooled more than a few hungry eyes. Some added sage for flavor, others mashed beans into the mix to stretch it further. It didn't taste like chicken, but it tasted like trying, and trying mattered most. Mock chicken fooled the eye, if not the tongue, though with a little creativity, you might pull it off yourself. Would you give it a try? Eggless meatloaf. The Depression's most famous trick wasn't meat. It was pretending there was. Ground beef was precious, so families stretched it with breadcrumbs, oats, mashed beans, and even shredded carrots. When the eggs ran out, a spoon of flour or mashed potato held everything together. The mixture was pressed into a tin, glazed with ketchup or tomato jam, and baked until the house smelled like plenty. As it cooked, the loaf crackled and browned, releasing a scent of onion and sweet tomato that felt like better days returning. Slices were cut thick, served with water gravy or a side of boiled potatoes. No one cared that it wasn't the real thing. It looked like meatloaf. It sliced like meatloaf, and it brought the same quiet gratitude that the real one once did. At the table, people didn't talk about shortage. They talked about tomorrow. And tomorrow always started with something hot, even if it was only imagination cooked just right. They called these meals making do, but they were closer to conjuring. Flour into comfort, vinegar into sweetness, nothing into something worth remembering. Yet hunger still had lessons to teach. In the next kitchen, even meat and milk disappeared, but the spirit of invention only grew stronger. What happens when you strip a meal to its bones and still find flavor? That's where we're heading next, to the meatless feasts that kept hope alive. Bean loaf. They called it the working man's roast, though no butcher ever saw it. Beans were the backbone of survival, sturdy and forgiving. A pot simmered on every stove, the beans swelling slowly until they softened into something between soup and paste. Once drained, they were mashed with fried onions, breadcrumbs, and a pinch of salt. If the family had an egg, it went in. If not, cold mashed potatoes or even oatmeal took its place. The mixture was pressed into a dented loaf pan and brushed with a glaze of ketchup, molasses, or syrup from a borrowed jar. As it baked, the smell drifted outside, sweet, smoky, and so much like real meat that neighbors stopped to breathe it in. Inside, the crust turned deep brown, the edges caramelizing like roast drippings. It sliced clean, held firm, and tasted faintly of onion and nostalgia. Bean loaf was more than sustenance. It was theater. It fooled the senses long enough to let a family believe, even for one meal, that things might get better. And when the last piece cooled on the windowsill, it became lunch for tomorrow. A promise disguised as leftovers. Fried mush. The recipe fit on a matchbox: cornmeal, salt, water. Yet those three things turned hunger into habit. Yesterday's corn mush, cooled overnight in a tin pan, was sliced into rectangles and fried in lard or bacon grease. When it hit the skillet, it popped and sang like rain on a roof. The scent of toasted grain filled the kitchen. Warm, honest, slightly sweet. Edges browned, crisping to a thin shell while the middle stayed tender as pudding. Each piece flipped once, no more, cooked until the crust looked like the color of a summer field. Served with a drizzle of syrup, it leaned sweet. With water gravy or onions, it became savory and strong. Kids ate it with their fingers, breaking off corners still too hot to hold. It was breakfast, lunch, and supper, depending on how the day went. For a food so plain, it carried the sound of survival, the hiss of hot fat, the scrape of forks, the sigh that came with the first bite. Fried mush reminded people that life didn't need flavor to feel good, just heat, timing, and gratitude. Cabbage steaks, cabbage, cheap, filling, and almost impossible to ruin. It grew when other crops failed and kept through the winter when everything else spoiled. When meat disappeared, it became the star of the table. Heads were sliced into thick rounds and brushed with bacon fat, lard, or even water mixed with salt to mimic oil. They went into the oven or onto the griddle, roasting until the outer leaves curled, darkened, and began to crackle. The smell was deep and buttery, earthy like wood smoke and rain. Children sat near the stove, waiting for the sound of sizzling that meant dinner wasn't far. When the knife finally cut through, steam burst out, smelling faintly sweet. Each steak was browned at the rim, pale at the heart, tender enough to pull apart with a fork. Served with a splash of vinegar or a drizzle of molasses, it carried both brightness and depth. Nobody called it imitation. It was reinvention, the art of pretending without shame. And as the plates were wiped clean, families learned a quiet truth. Sometimes dignity tastes like cabbage. Depression hash. Rich or poor, city or country, everyone made it differently, and all made it proudly. It began with leftovers, potatoes, beans, vegetables, scraps of bread, maybe a spoon of bacon fat if fortune smiled. All of it went into the same pan, sizzling into chaos that smelled like comfort. The spatula scraped and stirred, clinking against iron as the ingredients browned together, fusing into something more than the sum of its parts. Onion sweetened, cabbage caramelized, and the scent wrapped through thin walls like a blanket. Each spoonful tasted of the week that came before, a little salt from Monday's bacon, a little smoke from Wednesday's fire. It was never the same twice, but always familiar. Fried crisp, served hot. It became a feast by another name. Children fought for the browned edges. Adults smiled into their plates. There was laughter again, and that was worth more than meat. Hash wasn't about flavor. It was about memory, the comfort of creating something from what the world forgot. Everyone had their own leftover hash back then. What's yours today? Tell us below before we move on. Poor man's shepherd's pie. They joked about the name, but they never joked about the taste. A layer of mashed potatoes went down first, thin, stretched with water, seasoned with salt and hope. Then came the filling, beans, onions, carrots, turnips, maybe a scoop of leftover hash if the week had been kind. Everything simmered together with broth or even plain water, thickened with a spoon of flour. Another layer of potatoes sealed it in, smoothed flat with the back of a spoon like snow over a field. As it baked, the smell drew neighbors to the porch, just to ask what was cooking. The top browned slowly, edges crisping to a golden crust that cracked when the spoon broke through. Steam rolled out in clouds, carrying the scent of earth and comfort. Each serving fell apart perfectly, creamy, salty, faintly sweet. It filled bellies, quieted worries, and for one night made every table feel rich again. The leftovers fried beautifully the next day, proof that even hard times could offer second helpings of joy. Poor man's shepherd's pie was more than food. It was a reminder that the poorest homes often cooked the richest stories. After the simplest meals had been mastered, after vinegar pies and mock meats and loaves built from beans, came the question every family faced: how to make the harvest last. This was the era of creativity's second act, because survival wasn't just about cooking what was left. It was about stretching every scrap until the next crop came through, or until luck changed. This was where patience became its own kind of recipe. Hoover stew. A joke name that hurt to laugh at, yet everyone made it. It began in church basements and school kitchens, where volunteers stirred pots taller than a man, ladles clanging like bells, macaroni, canned tomatoes, navy beans, and the cheapest sausage they could find, all thrown together with the precision of hope. At home, the recipe shifted to match the pantry: rice when pasta ran out, corn when beans did, water when stock was gone. It simmered until thick, a red sauce clinging stubbornly to the spoon. Children fished for the rare slice of sausage, as if it were treasure. It wasn't elegant, but it filled the silence between empty cupboards. For pennies, it fed a family. For one evening, it let people pretend they'd beaten the times. Hoover stew tasted like invention itself. The kind of meal that still shows up in a few kitchens today. Maybe yours? Tell us below if it does. Cabbage and dumplings. One cabbage, a handful of flour, and faith. That was dinner. The leaves were chopped rough and boiled with onion peel and a scrap of fat. Steam clouded the windows while the smell, sweet, sharp, stubborn, filled every room. While the pot rolled, mothers mixed the dough by hand, flour and water kneaded until it clung to their fingers. Pinched into knobs and dropped into the broth, the dumplings rose slow, softening the soup into something thick and silky. The cabbage turned tender, the bitterness fading to something comforting. It looked humble, but it tasted like work well done, the flavor of endurance. Families ate with quiet pride, knowing they'd made a meal from next to nothing. Corn pone, the bread that never waited for tomorrow. Cornmeal, salt, and water stirred until heavy, then shaped into discs and cooked in a smoking skillet. No yeast, no rise, just heat and faith. Every hiss from the pan released the scent of roasting grain and smoke. If bacon grease was available, a spoonful went in, adding richness to every bite. The outside crisped, the inside stayed dense, sweet with corn's natural sugar. Served with beans or drizzled with molasses, it was proof that poverty couldn't erase pride. Corn pone has nearly vanished from modern tables, though a few southern kitchens still keep it alive. Would you try it yourself someday? Dandelion greens. When money couldn't buy vegetables, nature still offered them for free. At first light, children wandered fields and ditches with buckets, fingers stained green by dew. Back home, mothers rinsed the leaves in tin tubs, the water turning brown before it cleared. Boiled once to tame their bite, then again with salt pork or vinegar to bring balance. The greens softened into something dark and tender. Their smell was sharp, earth and lemon, spring and smoke. Served beside cornbread or over bread crusts, they gave the meal color, flavor, and a trace of pride. Eating weeds wasn't shameful. It was wise. The land still remembered you, even when the store shelves forgot. Potato soup. By late winter, when the cellar was bare and the ground too hard to dig, there were always potatoes, soft, sprouting, but still enough to save a family. They were peeled thin to spare waste and sliced into water with onion ends and salt. If milk had run out, a spoon of bacon grease took its place. The fire popped, the pot bubbled. The smell, earthy, faintly sweet, drifted through the walls. The broth thickened into a pale, starchy comfort that fogged windows and thawed fingers. Sometimes dumplings floated on top, sometimes just pepper. There was no garnish, no show, only quiet satisfaction. For a few minutes, even the wind seemed to pause outside. Potato soup didn't boast. It endured, soft, humble, and steady as the people who made it. Every family had its own version of poor man's soup. Maybe yours did too. Share it below while we keep stirring through history. They called these recipes making do, but they were closer to mastery, the art of stretching the season until the next blessing arrived. Yet even when the harvest was stretched to its end, no one cooked in silence. People still gathered, still shared what little they had, still found laughter rising through the steam. Because sometimes survival wasn't about what you cooked, it was about who you cooked with. Let's step into those shared kitchens next, where one pot fed a dozen, and hope came ladled with every serving. Mulligan stew. They called it a stew, though no two pots ever tasted the same. It began in camps along the tracks, canvas lean-tos, barrel fires, a dented kettle blackened by 100 nights. Each man arrived with what he could carry or trade: a bruised potato, a turnip from a field, a carrot saved from a soup line, a cup of water from the pump. Someone found a windbreak, someone struck a match, and the first chunk hit the bottom of the pot with a hiss that meant supper had begun. Onion ends followed, then a heel of salt pork if luck had passed through that day. Maybe even a splash of coffee to deepen the broth. A pocket knife did the chopping, a stick did the stirring, and the smoke stitched itself into every coat within reach of the fire. The scent rose into the cold, tin, earth, and something like hope. When the pot finally burped and bubbled slow, tin cups lined up, and the ladle made its rounds. The flavor was whatever the day could offer, but the feeling was always the same. Nobody was a stranger while the pot was full. Would you have joined that campfire for a bowl? Many did, just for company. Let's see where the rails led next. Hobo hash. A skillet meal for the open road, fast to make, easy to share, and forgiving to every mistake. It started with thin sliced potatoes and rough chopped onion, the blade scraping on a tin plate, the pieces tossed straight into a pan set on stones. A thumb of fat melted first, or a few drops of water if there was no fat to be had. Either way, the sound of the sizzle pulled everyone closer. Scraps joined in. A tomato traded for helping unload a crate, a handful of beans from a can found in a trash bin. A sliver of bacon earned mending a fence. A stick served as a spatula, scraping up the brown bits like treasure. If someone had an egg, it went in last, cracked into the center, and coaxed to set while the edges crisped. Bread crusts toasted at the rim, then soaked up the juices until they tasted richer than they had any right to be. Portions were drawn with the tip of a knife, even shares, quick smiles. The aroma drifted down the track and drew strangers in, guided only by smell. The secret wasn't seasoning, it was sharing. When a dozen hungry men turned scraps into something worth eating, it stopped being about hunger at all. Church potluck casserole. When cupboards thinned, sanctuaries became kitchens, and survival disguised itself as celebration. Women arrived early with whatever they could spare: a cup of beans, half a can of tuna, a scoop of cooked noodles, a fistful of rice, a jar of gravy stretched with flour and water. In the basement, enamel ovens glowed orange. Borrowed pans clattered like a hymn. Layers went down by instinct: starch, sauce, crumbs, then onion for courage and salt for balance. A topping of crumbled bread or crushed crackers made every pan look like Sunday. The air filled with the smell of toasted crumbs and bubbling edges. Tables were dressed with patched cloths. Cups were chipped but ready, and laughter arrived before the food did. No one asked who brought what. Everything belonged to everyone. Plates were passed, seconds encouraged, leftovers tucked into paper bags for the families who couldn't come. Those casseroles weren't about recipes. They were about the promise that no one would eat alone. WPA lunchroom soup. Relief kitchens gave the city a steady heartbeat, a line at the door, a steam cloud at the window, a clang of ladles that never seemed to stop. Trucks delivered sacks of potatoes, barrels of beans, crates of cabbage. Cooks with red, chapped hands washed and chopped until the water ran clear. Pots taller than a man rolled like tidewater. One thickened with barley, another bright with tomatoes, a third pale and humble with cabbage and onion. Seasoning was a luxury, but warmth was guaranteed. Children brought tin cups and stood on their toes. Adults carried jars wired back together after a break. A full ladle meant one more day survived. Sometimes a second ladle slipped in when no one was watching. People ate standing, steam fogging their faces. The taste simple and repetitive, but faithful. If the nation was going to rebuild, it would start here, one bowl at a time. Some of your parents may still remember those soup lines. If they ever spoke about them, share it below. From those lines came something remarkable. Neighbor's supper. Sometimes dinner began with a knock and a shy smile. One neighbor arrived with half a loaf, another with a jar of beans, a third with 2 apples and a story. Chairs were borrowed from every room. The lamp was turned low, and the stove took on the sound of a gentle engine. Bread warmed on the hearth, while a pot thickened on the back burner, stirred slow so it wouldn't catch. Coffee simmered, thin, bitter but bottomless, poured again and again into chipped mugs that fit the hand just right. Kids chased each other around boot heels. Adults traded talk about weather, work, and worry, each topic softening in the sharing. Plates were filled without measuring. Refills came without asking. If a family was short on sugar, someone poured from their jar. If out of coffee, someone scooped from theirs and said to keep the tin. By the time the night cooled, forks had quieted, and voices dropped to that easy hum that only follows a good meal. No one left empty-handed, and no one felt alone. These suppers turned survival into a habit of the heart, a recipe written in kindness that outlasted the hard years themselves. These meals weren't about filling plates. They were about filling hearts. Every pot, every ladle, every borrowed chair was an act of faith that no one should eat alone. But even in those moments of togetherness, people still found ways to sweeten the struggle. Small treats that proved joy could survive on crumbs. Next, we step into the warmest corner of the kitchen, the one that smelled of sugar, even when there wasn't any left. Fried apples. Sometimes dessert grew on the trees, and thank goodness for that. Apples stored in burlap sacks in cool cellars, their skins wrinkled but fragrant, were a saving grace when sugar ran out. A few were peeled and sliced thin, the flesh turning pink as air touched it. A skillet slicked with bacon grease or lard sat waiting on the stove, still warm from supper. When the fruit hit the pan, it hissed, a sound as quick and bright as laughter. The smell of caramel and smoke filled every corner, sharp and sweet, making mouths water before the first bite. A spoon of flour turned the juices thick. A splash of water made them shine. If a family had cinnamon, a pinch went in. If not, molasses gave it depth. The slices softened, curling at the edges, the syrup bubbling into amber ribbons that clung to the spoon. Served over biscuits or alone in a chipped bowl, the warmth spread faster than the food. Fried apples were a promise. Even without sugar, life could still taste sweet. Bread pudding. Nothing in the Depression went to waste, not even bread too hard to chew. The heels of loaves and stale rolls, hard enough to hammer nails, were torn into chunks and soaked in milk or water until they softened. If there was an egg, it joined the mix. If not, a spoonful of flour thickened it just fine. Molasses or coffee stood in for sugar, each giving its own color and comfort. The bowl clinked as it was stirred, and the smell of wet grain carried a hint of promise. The mixture poured into a greased pan, often the same one used for Sunday roast, and baked until the top blistered brown and crisp. Inside, it stayed soft, a pudding that tasted richer than its ingredients could explain. When the spoon broke through the crust, steam curled up smelling faintly of toast and spice. Each mouthful was warm, dense, and familiar, a small redemption for a long week. Bread pudding turned leftovers into luxury and scarcity into second chances. Sugarless cobbler. When sugar was rationed and fruit rare, cobbler became the art of pretending nothing was missing. The filling came from whatever the land gave, blackberries from the hedgerow, wind-fallen apples, or peaches saved in jars from last summer. They simmered with syrup or honey if there was any, or else were left to thicken on their own while the natural sugars deepened in color. The dough was a simple thing: flour, salt, baking powder, and just enough water to hold it together. Spoonfuls dropped across the bubbling fruit looked rough, uneven, and perfect. When the pan slid into the oven, the scent of warm fruit and flour chased the smell of smoke right out of the kitchen. The crust browned and cracked, juices bubbling through like jewels. When served, the top was crisp, the the bottom sweet and sticky, and the middle warm enough to melt every worry for a while. No one missed the sugar. They tasted summer, stored and remembered. Depression cake. No milk, no eggs, no butter, and yet it rose. Flour, sugar, cocoa, vinegar, and baking soda. That was the whole secret. When mixed, the vinegar and soda fizzed alive, giving lift where there was none to spare. A spoonful of coffee darkened the color and deepened the smell. A drizzle of oil gave it grace. The batter looked thin, doubtful, but faith in a hot oven turned it solid and soft. Mothers pressed a few raisins on top, treasures saved for birthdays or good grades. When the oven door opened, the scent rolled out, deep, earthy, bittersweet. Neighbors smelled it before they saw it and stopped by just to say hello. The crust cracked gently, the center stayed moist, and when the knife sliced through, it came away clean, leaving the faintest wisp of steam. Each bite was soft and slow, rich as memory. No milk, no eggs, no butter, and yet it rose. Would you try baking this miracle today? Poor man's pie. Molasses, hot water, and faith, that's all it took. Flour and salt were sifted, cut with lard until the dough looked like crumbs. Cold water bound it. A bottle stood in for a rolling pin, and the crust was patched into a tin that had seen better years. The filling simmered on the stove, molasses dark as coffee, stirred with a handful of flour until it thickened to silk. Sometimes a splash of vinegar was added to sharpen the edge, sometimes a knob of butter if someone had been paid that week. When poured into the crust, it shone like liquid amber. The oven worked its slow magic. The smell grew heavy and warm. The surface darkened, and the sound of bubbling sugar filled the room. When it cooled, the top glistened, and the crust flaked away at the first touch of a fork. It was rich and smoky, sticky at the edges, a sweet reward for those who'd learned to make plenty from nothing. Poor man's pie was the closing act of every hopeful kitchen, the taste of triumph at the end of the leanest day. Even in the darkest times, people saved room for sweetness. They baked not to impress, but to remember, to remind themselves that life still held warmth worth waiting for. Dessert was more than a treat. It was a declaration that the worst had passed, or at least that the evening could end with a smile. In the hush that followed dinner, as plates were cleared and lights dimmed, the scent of apples and sugar hung in the air like a lullaby. Somewhere between the scrape of spoons and the sighs of full bellies, America found its courage again, one crust, one slice, one bite at a time. And as the Depression faded into memory, those recipes stayed behind, hand-me-downs from a generation that learned to sweeten struggle with love. Because in the end, the taste that endures isn't butter or sugar, it's gratitude. Even in the hardest years, the American kitchen never went silent. There was always a pot simmering somewhere, in a farmhouse, a tenement, a church basement, filling the air with the scent of effort and hope. Those 25 meals weren't just food. They were stories of survival told in butter stains and burn marks, of families who refused to give up the habit of sharing. Maybe your parents or grandparents still remember some of these dishes. Maybe you've even cooked one yourself without realizing it carried history in every bite. A pot of beans, a pan of gravy, a slice of pie made without sugar or milk. Each was a quiet act of defiance, proof that flavor can come from faith and that the human spirit will always find a way to keep the fire lit. The Great Depression ended, but its lessons never did. They taught us that abundance isn't the same as comfort, and that the richest meal isn't measured in ingredients, but in togetherness. It's the laughter that fills the room, the steam that fogs the windows, the sound of forks scraping empty plates. Those small sounds still echo through generations, reminding us that the simplest dinners often leave the fullest hearts. If this brought back a memory, or stirred a story from your own family table, share it below. We'd love to hear it. And if you'd like to keep these memories alive with us, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. It helps us preserve the recipes that built a nation, one humble meal at a time.